But other communities love to reinforce and let you be reminded that this won't happen to them. And that brings me to the last purple space of emotions. Those emotions are very important because we all have emotions, regardless if we admit it or not. Even myself, I'm not an emotional person, but I do have emotions. And they are being conditioned in so many different levels. We're all conditioned with that based upon how we interact and how we move. And it's part of that human architecture that allows us to understand, because see, if we don't get these bearings on all these things that we're influenced by, as we brought to note, that means the money that we get in our hands will just disappear out of our hands because we're just consuming it instead of utilizing it for the ability to build assets and be in creation mode and to be in those spaces, to be in partnership with others. And then you start to see that compound interest and that ability to multiply, not just add, but to multiply start to occur. So these influences gradually shape. Are you consciously shaping your life or reacting to the conditioning around you? And that leads to those four on the bottom. How we perceive things, so our perception is always impacted. Our decision making, depending upon how you're conditioned. Are you making the right decisions that actually deliver the right results for your life? Or are you conditioned to do things in a particular way which does not create anything? It doesn't create wealth, it doesn't create health, it doesn't create possibility, which leads into our habits. What type of habits are you doing? What are the things that you're consistently positioning yourself in that allows you to be in a space to say, wait a minute, that's the reason why I keep doing this in a particular pattern. I'm establishing something that's part of my lifestyle. And of course, ultimately, it forms your identity. It forms that space of saying, wait a minute, who do I identify as? Am I always minimizing myself? Am I always looking at myself, I'm lesser than these people, or they're better than me, or that one's better than me? And it's like, wait a minute, whoa, 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 whoa. That human architecture, that conditioning has been well played. And that's why platforms like this and communities like this are so important. It's like, wait a minute, whoa, 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 whoa. We're gonna get you out of that identity of thinking that you're less than, or you should be minimized, or you shouldn't have a voice. So I'm gonna ask Dr. Cheryl, what would you say? Because you deal with a lot of this stuff, not only from a clinical space, but the stuff that you do with Speak Your Power Now. What would you say about this slide?
Well, the first thing I would say, I like how you talked about language, and how we're influenced by that. But a lot of things that I talk about is the communication and voice, and a lot of things that is really conditioned. It comes really from our formative years as we're growing in, we've been nurtured in. So with language, experience, relationship, culture, all of these things, emotions, and how we perceive things, all has to do with how we were nurtured. And a lot of times, if we're not aware, a lot of times we are in a space where we're not aware. So the way we communicate, and like when you just started the call today and you talked about from your perspective, what you were talking about is from your perspective as a Black man, as a man that has Black children, as a man that has a boy, male children. So, and when we look at this, we really got to look at what are we talking and how we're moving into the spaces is really a subtotal of culture, a subtotal how our language influences us, and the experience. And you also talked about how we was able to go to other countries and experience these things, and that also begins to nurture us. So the conditioning is so important of how healthy of an adult we become. And I'm complete.
Excellent. Anyone else before we move on to the next slide? Any thoughts? Open up the floor. If not, we'll move on. because we're always being conditioned, even when we're in our modes of being silent. That's part of our conditioning. That is ultimately part of the conditioning as well. It's so funny that there was a time frame, especially those who have our ancestry, because it wasn't only here in the Americas, that was happening all across the Caribbean as well, where they were choosing not to allow the slaves. I'm gonna look at the Africans who became slaves, because I hate that identification of saying, our slave forefathers. No, they were Africans who were forced into some level of labor and became slaves. That they didn't desire for us to be educated. There was no desire for us to have the ability to reason. Because when you start to have these attributes, like people who feel that they're so distinguished, you start to recognize, like, wait a minute, so if I don't think I'm subservient to you, then what does that mean? You may have a Nat Turner moment. And the only reason why Nat Turner wasn't as successful as he could have been, because if there were more people who had the identity to finally believe in themselves, well, Nat Turner had the ability because he was able to read, write, and he started to recognize how they were using the Bible to still keep those of African descent in a docile space. And when he finally awakened to his identity, it became like, wait a minute, this conditioning is wrong. So we have a we understand that Barack Obama, which to me he did a decent enough job as the 44th president. He wasn't perfect. He always, and that's one thing I can respect about him. He always talks about the fact of the things that he could have done better, and even certain decisions he made. That shows leadership, because none of us are perfect. But because of him, we start to recognize, I guess, people were so disturbed with the fact that we had an African American who did well for 2 terms, that the pendulum, as Miss Johnson spoke about earlier, the pendulum had to swing so wildly. It's not that Obama did something wrong. It just woke up the underbelly of people who could not perceive the fact that, like, wait a minute, their community is actually very powerful. We got to figure out a way how to minimize this thing, because now, if they keep identifying themselves as leadership, especially as the country is getting blacker and browner, we have to do something about this. That's all conditioning. Now, some of this framework comes from NLP, which is neuro-linguistic programming. And we all have patterns that allow us to learn NLP. NLP is not just one person's thing or framework. It is a conclave of different areas, and it started from a psychological space. So never let anyone feel like, when you start to hear this thing as like some sort of woo-woo or something out of sorts. No, it's about recognizing how to have your neural patterns, because when you see the word neuro, that means we're talking about mind. And too many times we can have certain things that can elevate our community, but there's always something that's put there to be the scarecrow. So when you see the word neuro, mind, and as even my wife is alluding to, linguistic, that means we're talking about language. What is the mind language that you're programming yourself to do and to be and to experience and to have and to develop and to work through? So neuro-linguistic programming, NLP, explores how, and Ms. Johnson, if you can read those those 5 arrow points, please.
Language influences perception. Thoughts influence emotions. Internal images affect behavior. Emotional states become linked to experiences. Repetition creates behavioral patterns.
So if I start with the first one, language influences perception. I remember when I started moving into those prepubescent years in the early 80s, I remember there was a time, they would laugh at kids that were smart. And I always wondered about that. Don't, you trying to be a nerd. You hear that stuff about nerd. And I never forget that, being 10-year, 11-year-old, and always I guess being told that, we were in the best classes and we had to get access to certain things that some of the other classes didn't get because we were able to start to articulate and start to perceive and start to develop our language. And it's so true, depending upon, and that's why it's such a disservice how they do certain urban and even sometimes certain rural communities. Because if the people are not educated, you'll fall for anything. That's the reason why Donald Trump became president again. Because when you start to break down the data and the demographics, most of the people who voted for this man weren't fully perceived in their spaces of education. It's not a make wrong, it's just the data. The data doesn't lie. And sometimes it may seem very black and white, but the truth is the truth is the truth. Just like the bunch of the people who stormed the Capitol on January 6, 2021, the ones that were really, who I would say positioned the people to do what they did, weren't out there doing what they were doing. Those were the grunt soldiers. Those are the Proud Boys. Those were the, whatever militias and all the other mess. But they had backing. So language influences your perception. Now, thoughts influence emotions. That's why if you're not an individual who at least, and it's not about being some sort of superior 100% thought thinker every single moment of the day, no. But you have to recognize that your thoughts have a big paramount space in how you move through your emotions. So what type of thoughts are you thinking? Are you always thinking that there's scarcity? Are you always thinking from lack? Are you always thinking no those thoughts? If that is the general space that you're working through, is going to influence how you move emotionally. Your internal imaging affects your behavior. If you keep thinking, and that's why it was such a disservice as we're recognizing now, and even most people have some sort of sense based upon the region. When you walked in too many African American homes and you had Michelangelo's cousin up on your wall, that starts to create an internal image. Now, if you had, JFK or Martin Luther King, that wasn't too bad. By having Michelangelo's cousin on your wall was part of the positioning of how you're being programmed. And then when you start to grow and start to move in those spaces of some level of awareness, you start to recognize, like, wait a minute, whoa, 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 hey. This is positioned to keep you subservient.
Dr. Clarke, can you explain that reference for the people who might not understand what Michelangelo's cousin means?
Oh, I was talking about, there's plenty of households, and I know throughout the Caribbean and throughout the Americas where, that picture, that probably one of the most sold pictures or frames, or that was in a frame in your house, was that picture of Jesus, looking so nice with his long flowing long hair, and just looking up, and most of the pictures had the little red heart, somewhere on the picture to show that, he was connected because, the Son of God came down to, bless us. That was Michelangelo's cousin. Jesus didn't look like that. I know we're not going into a Bible study in this teaching, but from the indigenous region near the Benin, Egypt, and the Niger regions of that area, which they had to call the Middle East, because that means you would start to say that, wait a minute, are you telling me that the Mediterranean area is connected to Africa, which it is? So yes, for some of you who probably were raised in those households, probably very colonialistic, you had that wonderful picture in your house. Now the symbolism, I'm not mad at the symbolism, I'm mad at the image. Because the image was positioned to keep us minimized. So I thank you for that, Miss Johnson. So if you're in that space where it's like, oh my God, you're talking about my Jesus, I'm not talking about your Jesus. I'm talking about Michelangelo's cousin that you had up on your wall. That y'all will walk by and sometimes, genuflex by and stuff like that, not recognizing even all of that is part of the imaging to influence you, to be conditioned. Like how they would say, becoming wealthy or moving in a space where you know about money and becoming adept to make sure that people around you know about money that look like you. You know what I'm saying? That's a problem. No, the love of money is the root of all evil. We go to Deuteronomy 8:18, but just like I said, it's not a Bible study. You do your own research. You just go to Deuteronomy 8:18, and that will explain everything. That you see why conditioning is so paramount in regards to our community to keep us in a docile space. Now, emotional states become linked to experiences because sometimes we can emote, or sometimes we can get in a space where we can be verbally abusive, we can be physically abusive, we can feel like we got. It's like, whoa, whoa, whoa. Your emotional state is off. No, that's just how we do. Yeah, that you've been conditioned to move like this. That's the reason why you're doing some of the stuff. It's part of the conditioning. And repetition creates behavioral patterns. What you repeatedly do, like you sometimes have heard me say, and I've learned this phrase, and it's so true. The way you do one thing is the way you do everything. Because repetition is just like learning in the classroom. The more and more we keep re-emphasizing certain things, especially when I used to be a teacher in urban classrooms, it's like, wait a minute, we're doing this repetition because after a while, by the end, after these 9 months or 9.5 months that we are together, I should have prepared you for the next grade. And a lot of that is based on repetition. Now we translate that into our respective lives, and it's like, wait a minute, okay. What are the things that you repeatedly do? That's why they say if you hang around the right people, you start to, by osmosis, start to do things that can accentuate your life. But if you keep hanging around the people that's doing all the stuff that doesn't benefit you, maybe what you're putting into your body, maybe what you're experiencing, what you're allowing yourself to hear, what you're allowing yourself just to consume from a body standpoint, you start to recognize how those behavioral patterns will generate a result. So NLP is not everything. It is just one framework for understanding how human experience is organized. So I'm going to ask Dr. Cheryl, because I know this is part of her, not only her PhD in organizational leadership, but since she's a marriage and family therapist, just to talk to this before we move on to the slide. What would you say about this slide, Miss Dr. Cheryl?
Okay, so a couple of things that come up for me is understanding. You talked about a lot of things, but when you talked about the pictures in the house and things of that nature, sometimes we're not aware that we're being conditioned even from the pictures in the home. Inadvertently, we're being trained, conditioned by our conversations and things like things of that nature. And what we have learned, I know even in my household, is don't be in grown person's conversation, things of that nature. You were told that from very young. So it's important for us to understand that our communication is the power. And we're taught to how to begin to maybe play ourselves small, and we're not even aware of it. So it's important for us to get these experiences and understand the conditioning is important, and to realize that our language in our homes, the pictures that we have in our home, our belief system, all of those things they do create internal dialogues that we need to be aware of. And spaces like this makes us just aware of how we can begin to see the bigger picture. And I'm complete.
Thank you for that. Anyone else's thoughts before we move on?
Doc, a thought just occurred to me.
Go ahead, Mr. Brindley.
You know, as it just kind of crept into my mind. Why? What was Obama's biggest contribution to the black man in America? And just to make it short, it doesn't matter what story you make up as to how he got to be the president of the United States. What just settled in my mind is that what has been shown is that a black man in our lifetime could become the president of the United States. If you were asked what is the most impossible elevation that you could see in this time, it wouldn't be difficult to say a black man becoming president of the United States. It never happened. It did. So what we have seen is what is possible. And if what the average person thought to be impossible happened, perhaps this massive effort to expunge so much of what we would refer to as the progress that our community have made. I think the biggest thing is that we see now that if we set our mind to it, to make a synonym of this, we can walk on water if we set our mind to it. The question is, are we ready to set our mind to being great, although the cost of being great might be a little high, but are we prepared to set our mind to it? Because everything is possible if you believe. I think that is a verse from somewhere, but that just kind of settled in my mind just now as you were sharing. I'm complete.
Thank you for that. Appreciate that. Now this slide won't stay long on. Multiple disciplines explain human behavior. Different fields examine different aspects of change. As you can tell, it's the field and was the focus. So we dealt with behavioral psychology, that is focused on the conditioning aspects. Neuro-linguistic programming is about anchoring. That's what part of from the title slide is about anchoring. Psychoanalysis, psycho, which means we're dealing with also your brain functions, and that analysis part of it, the focus on that is transference. That's why, as we were talking about that picture, and Dr. Sher was alluding to the fact that, unintendedly, that's psychoanalysis. I'm not making it wrong that they had that picture up on most of our households, especially of African American descent, and they put that picture up and it was positioned that way, or the conversations were led in that particular way, and that stuff was perpetuated. No, we're not making the people wrong. No, they're not wrong. That was part of the linguistic program, the neuro-linguistic programming, to say that, white is good and black is this. And so the psychoanalysis is part of that transference, because now you perpetuate a lie enough, it starts to become a truth. And then when you find out, it's like, wait a minute, that was a lie. Now some people are in an uproar, like, what is going on here? Yes. That transference was so ingrained in the culture, or attempted to be ingrained in the culture, to make you seem like, oh my God, I remember all that stuff when I was in the 80s, you're African booty scratching, all that other foolishness, like not recognized like women. Africans never acted like that. That was Hollywood's imagery of perpetuating the psychoanalysis, which transferred that information. Tarzan's always swinging, and the natives just look like they're running around like they're. No, that was all part of it. So we're not making the people who receive the transference wrong. What we're recognizing, which allows us to be expansive in our possibilities and continue to be expansive in our mindset, in our neuro-linguistic work, is that, wait a minute, okay, we see what you were utilizing this stuff for. You were attempting to keep people subservient and not to know the truth. And now as people have access to the technologies that are at hand, it's like, wait a minute, this stuff that you perpetuated is no longer holding weight. Now it's like, okay, you got to figure out something else. Because in some ways, people probably would have desired for Obama to fail, to be an incompetent president, which he wasn't. Which means, wait a minute. Same way as Dave made the statement about, in my lifetime, would I have seen a Black president? Now we had one who had a powerful Black woman next to him, had a beautiful Black family, and represented the country very intelligent and very polished and very disciplined. So that means a lot of those narratives that they were running around with through psychoanalysis, through some of the stuff that they used to attempt to anchor to keep us minimized and say, you shouldn't go for some of those bigger jobs. Stay as a carpenter. Don't think you can be a scientist or an engineer or a mathematician and go to those STEM. Stay over here working over here. No, we can make it into space. So semiotics is the symbolic meaning. That's part of it as well. See, they're all different parts that work together for how certain things are conditioned. Social psychology, your group identity. Just like we was talking about Mr. Wells earlier, that group, when you see the pictures, based upon where he was going and his athletic ability and his family background, the young man was a decent student, going in the right direction. But for July 4th weekend, the long weekend, and school is out, his group identity, he hung out with others from another community. Now we're waiting for an autopsy to see what happened to this young man. That's social psychology. Political psychology, collective influence. See, this is where Trump, you got to give Trump credit. Because the scary thing about it is we have the documentation that shows that even in the 80s, when he was just up and coming and, throwing his name on everything here in New York, he told y'all the plan and it still worked. He said, if I ever ran for anything, I would go as a Republican. They would just follow me and just that. You can find it. Go online. Do your research. So you don't think that, we're talking hearsay. It's out there. It's documented. He told y'all. That just lets you know that political psychology, that collective influence, the ability to market is powerful. That's why advertising is powerful. Even as I'm watching the World Cup, when these people are having their conversations with some of the players or the coaches and stuff like that, you see that thing, they throw that thing on right behind them real quick. So you can see all the sponsors, all the people who have advertised. And lastly, mass communication, your media effects. That's why, how you consume your media is so important. But remember, no single discipline explains the whole person. We all have the different parts, and all of this stuff is at work in the conditioning. That's why it's not saying, oh, we're just going to point our finger at television. It's not just television. Oh, we're going to say, you're hanging around the wrong people. It's not just hanging around the wrong people. There's a lot of stuff that has occurred that has gotten us to this point. But now that we're becoming aware of it, and especially here at the the Comeback Collective Circle as a part of the Dynasty path, no, we're gonna explain it, because these are things sometimes you got to dig under the surface so we can expose it, so we can recognize all the other stuff that we may desire to do, like be great as an entrepreneur, build business, great in investments, being a creator and not a consumer. All of that stuff is based upon knowing how you were conditioned. Human experience is multi-layered. Starts with thoughts. I won't spend so much time on this slide either. Thoughts, your internal ideas and perceptions. Your thoughts are going to lead you. If you think yourself small, that's what you're going to be. If you think yourself big, that's what you're going to be. You choose. Your emotions, feelings shaped by thoughts. Yes, your emotions are an outpicturing of your thoughts. You have the right thoughts, your emotions are going to work in concert with that. Not saying that there won't be times you won't be disturbed or angry or expressive and stuff like that, but because we're human. But if you have more of the right thoughts, you're not really emoting in ways that can be considered detrimental. And then your relationships, the connections influenced by your emotions. After a while, that takes time. What type of relationships are you building? What type of areas are you creating your own human experience in? Because we're only spirits having these human experiences. So what is the human experience that we're delving into and creating? Culture, the shared norms formed by relationship. Most of the people that I'm called to have some sort of African background or Caribbean background, or looks like me. They can be Dominicano or Boricua, and all of a sudden you touch their hair. When I did have hair on my head, their hair felt like mine or felt like my wife's. Like, wait a minute, because you on this island doesn't mean that the gene pool is not interrelated. We share a culture. And meaning, the significance derived from culture. And that was the main thing that other communities were doing their best to remove us from. Because once you recognize how significant you are, that's your power base, because that means no one's going to talk you down from who you can potentially be, because we all can be potentially something. Ms. Johnson, can you read those too many paragraphs, please?
Your life is influenced by interconnected layers, each one shaping the next in a continuous flow from inner thought to outward action. Transformation often requires working across multiple layers rather than only one.
Yes. There's no one-trick pony. There's no island that you're going to be on. I'm just going to do this by myself. No. You need relationships. That's why you see in the 7 parts that start from thoughts to your emotions to your relationships, your culture, meaning. Those are the 5 we're above. And then after meaning, because your significance is derived from culture, you start to see that starts to bear your identity. Who do you identify as? Because your identity is going to shape your behavior. If you act like a king or a queen or a prince or a princess, your behavior is a different vibration. Because people will make the assumption, wouldn't you put behavior? No. Your identity, what you identify as, will show how you walk, how you carry yourself, how you talk, how expressive you're going to be. What are your cultural norms? So remember, all of us having these respective experiences generate a space, but they all work together. Let's just, I'm only going to deal with my thoughts. No, then Your thoughts is going to relate back to your emotions, which will influence your relationships, which shows what type of culture that you're having and what do you identify as. And then you're starting to have a meaning from that culture, which will start to let us have a glimpse of what type of behavior you will do. The dynasty perspective. Growth involves more than acquiring knowledge. It requires learning how meaning is formed. The stories we tell ourselves define what we believe is possible. Beliefs develop. Beliefs grow from repeated experiences and the meaning we assign to them. As I know earlier today, myself and Dr. Cheryl were blessed enough to be having a conversation with some individuals, and we started to recognize, certain things that we believe, we can start to not only internalize, but start to project out. And if we keep holding on certain thoughts, after a while, we start to create something that may not necessarily be there, but we've developed it by our beliefs. Our identity evolves. Who we are is not fixed. It is continuously shaped by choice and awareness. That's why your identity is still a work in progress. That's why it was more disrespectful when they started to make assumptions, all black people do this. Like, no, they don't. All black people are not. Please don't put us as some sort of monolith. That's disrespectful. It's like, okay, yeah, they all like chicken and watermelon. Oh, where'd you get what? No. We're evolving identities, even as we share a culture of diaspora. And when we recognize that, we start to understand that, yeah, we need all the necessary parts. Not everyone could be a basketball player or an athlete. We do need the scientists. We do need the business people. We do need the bankers. We do need the doctors. We do need the lawyers. We're not one-trick ponies because your habits become established. Repeated actions wire themselves into automatic patterns over time. That's when we start talking about you when you're building your lifestyle. I'm still shaping my lifestyle, but it took a long time for me to get from the space where I was extremely unhealthy to the point now that I'm healthy. I can be better, but I'm healthy. That doesn't mean I'm going to be, okay, now that I'm healthy, I'm going to stop. No, I got to keep this thing going. You got to maintain this thing. That's the maintenance part of it. That's the habit. And certain habits, you may not necessarily like a habit, but once you've built a lifestyle, like, wait, we got to keep going. We got to keep doing this. And our choices shape the future. Every decision is a vote for the person you are becoming, not where you were. Now, you can have those habits, you can have those things that were formed, and you can recognize certain things as an establishment. But if you're moving forward, the choices that you're even making today will influence what will happen later on. So understanding these processes gives us greater agency in how we respond to life. So we recognize our meaning, those beliefs, how we establish ourselves in our identity, what type of habits that we're allowing ourselves to run through, and the choices that allow us to say, okay, I may be here now, but I know where I desire to go and where I'm going to work towards going, and I will get there. And that's what we're doing even as a community here at the Comeback Collective Circle. And the final slide for tonight, the reflection. These are some of the questions that you can ask yourself. What beliefs did I inherit? There's a whole bunch. And you start to recognize, wait a minute, what beliefs did I intentionally choose? There's another aha moment, because there's certain things like, wait a minute, oh my God, did I really accept that? I really started to really internalize that based upon what was shared with me. And even as I started to have access to information, I still continually chose that. Now, that's something else. Which patterns continue to serve me? Because that's when you start to recognize there are certain things that you were given or you were exposed to that actually is very beneficial. It's like, wait a minute, no. Some of those things, yeah, we're going to keep doing that. We're going to keep doing that. Which leads to the last question that you should have a reflection on. Which patterns deserve re-examination? So, Dr. Cheryl, before we close, what would you say about this particular slide about these four different questions? Because I know it kind of aligns with some of the stuff you're doing with as the voice doctor.
Well, I would just say in a nutshell, you got to recognize patterns, but sometimes it takes another person to actually see your patterns. Sometimes when we're close up to the patterns, we don't know that we're in a perpetual pattern that no longer serves us. And then after you understand and be aware of the patterns, then you got to intentionally choose to begin to move and to get out of the pattern of that no longer serves you. Because sometimes, like in this day, and I would say after COVID, we were all in a pattern because we were locked down. Then we had to relearn some patterns outside, and then we had to be able to be 6 feet apart. Then we had to be able to do that. So different patterns that we're in, we got to look and re-examine it, and we should do that. I would say every 30 days because we're always changing and shifting, because that's the way we can be able to know that. And then you could do that with your community. How am I showing up? Because people will tell you, people will let you know, and then you'll be able to move into a new stasis that you would like to be in. And I'm complete.
Excellent. Thank you for that. Anything from you, Miss Johnson, before we close? Any thoughts? Any takeaways?
Takeaway is to be more present as to what I'm allowing to invade my psyche, because that is definitely shaping the way I see and perceive things. And I'm complete.
Excellent. Excellent. Anything from you, Mr. Grindley, before we close?
Yeah, I enjoyed the conversation because it shows that we are multidimensional, and there's a lot to becoming. And I enjoy the little pieces that were kind of put in place for me to get a little better understanding of that becoming. I appreciate you.
Appreciate you as well. Amen. On Dynasty Path Insight. The first step towards transformation is awareness. Before changing behavior, learn to recognize the invisible forces that have shaped it. So I'm not asking you tonight to be just a change agent. What I'm asking you to do is to move into that first step of which is to be aware. If you're willing to aware, as you can see by the image on the right, about the light. When you have awareness, you have a light. And once you have awareness, you have the ability to dim your own light. You can so choose to dim it, or you can so choose to make it blazing. It's not a make wrong. It's always your choice. So if you got anything out of tonight, make sure you become aware. And once you become aware, you become powerful. Because there may be certain things that you've done that you start to recognize, like, yo, I can't move like that no more. It's not beneficial. It doesn't benefit me. It doesn't benefit my community. It doesn't benefit my family. And once you get that established, you start to see how those things manifest itself in the long term. And with that, we are complete. So once again, we appreciate everyone who has been here, especially those who will see this on replay. Make sure you become a subscriber to the YouTube channel at Dr. Gregory Clarke, Master Coach. Don't forget that E at the end of Clark. Don't forget my E. It may sound silent, but it's very powerful. And on top of that, we continue to advise you. And, if you're not part of the email list as of yet, as we will start doing the email chain very soon, definitely go to CoachClarkeDmin.com. That's once again, CoachClarkeDmin.com. And when you go take the fourth quarter assessment, it'll give you the opportunity to share your name and your email. And so that, some of the things that you being a part of the circle, you will be able to manifest through. And last and definitely not least is the ability to share with the Comeback Collective Circle. We use the resources that come in with more of the advertising, the more the marketing, the more the exposure of this platform and this community. So these respective ways to support, if you desire to do it via Cash App, $ Gregory Clarke D Min. If you desire to do it via Venmo, just drop the $, and you have Gregory Clarke D Min as my Venmo. And if you desire to do it via Zelle or PayPal, it's the same email address, and that is esquire971@gmail.com. So until next week, when we'll be back at the same time, same space, invite others, be enlightened. We appreciate you. We love you. And as we continue to love ourselves, then we can love others. So have a great week and see you all next week.
Same to you, Dad. Take care.
Night, everyone.
Good night.